Imagine climbing 1,200 feet up a sheer desert cliff, carrying your children, knowing this may be the last place you'll ever stand. That's what nearly 1,000 people did, on top of a plateau overlooking the Dead Sea in the final days of a war they had already lost. A Roman legion of thousands surrounded them below. There was nowhere left to run. What happened on top of that cliff has been told and retold for 2,000 years as one of history's most powerful acts of defiance. But historians still argue about how much of that story we can actually trust, because almost everything we know comes from a single account, written by one man, years after the fact. This is Masada, and before we get to that final night, this is what it actually looked like. The palace a king built out of fear, that a nation's last rebels turned into their final stand. We used modern digital reconstruction, built from decades of excavation at the site, to rebuild it exactly as it stood. Masada's story doesn't begin with Herod the Great, though he's the name most associated with it. Fortification of this plateau likely began earlier, during the Hasmonean period, the era of the Jewish priestly royal dynasty that ruled Judea before Herod's time. Exactly who built the first fortress here isn't entirely settled in the historical record. Some ancient and modern sources credit the high priest Jonathan, while others attribute it to Alexander Jannaeus or his successors, sometime in the 2nd or early 1st century BC. It was Herod, however, who transformed Masada from a modest stronghold into something far more ambitious. Around 37 to 31 BC, Herod undertook a massive construction project on this isolated cliff top, and his motivation had almost nothing to do with military strategy in the conventional sense. Herod built Masada primarily out of fear. As king of Judea under Roman authority, he faced genuine threats to his rule, including the ambitions of Cleopatra VII, who at various points sought to expand her influence over his territory, and the constant possibility of internal revolt from a Jewish population that never fully accepted him as their legitimate king. Masada, then, was designed as a refuge, a place Herod and his family could retreat to and survive a siege indefinitely if his throne or his life were ever seriously threatened. That single motivation explains nearly everything unusual about the site. Why it sits in such an extreme, defensible location, why its water systems are so remarkably over-engineered for the small population it was designed to shelter, and why its palace architecture, while genuinely luxurious, was built with defense and self-sufficiency as an equal priority alongside comfort. This wasn't a king showing off his wealth to visiting dignitaries. This was a king building an insurance policy against his own downfall. And it's worth remembering that Herod himself never actually needed to use it during his lifetime. What Herod's engineers accomplished at Masada remains genuinely remarkable, even by the standards of Roman-era construction elsewhere in the empire. At the northern edge of the plateau stood Herod's most striking architectural achievement, a 3-tiered palace built directly into the natural rock face of the cliff, cascading downward across multiple levels, connected by staircases carved into the stone itself. Excavations led by Israeli archaeologist Yigael Yadin in the 1960s uncovered lavishly decorated rooms within this complex, featuring colonnades and painted frescoes reflecting Roman artistic taste, blended with the more restrained architectural sensibilities more typical of Judean building traditions at the time. Beyond the northern palace, the plateau held a separate western palace complex, along with storerooms substantial enough to hold provisions for an extended siege, administrative buildings, and a bathhouse built and decorated in genuine Roman style, complete with a hot room, warm room, and cold room following the standard Roman bathing sequence. But the single most impressive feat of engineering at Masada wasn't visible from the surface at all. Herod's engineers carved an extensive network of massive cisterns directly into the rock, positioned to capture and store seasonal runoff water during the desert's brief, rainy periods. This system was sophisticated enough to sustain a substantial population living atop an isolated desert plateau year-round, in a location with almost no natural water source of its own. Combined with the storerooms above, this water system meant that Masada could theoretically support a defending population for a genuinely extended period of time, cut off from any outside resupply. Precisely the kind of extreme, self-sufficient defensive capability a king planning for his own worst-case scenario would demand. Herod died in 4 BC, and for roughly 70 years afterward, Masada continued to function as a fortified outpost, maintained and garrisoned, but no longer serving as anyone's active royal refuge. That changed in 66 AD, when the First Jewish-Roman War broke out across Judea. As open rebellion spread, a group of Jewish rebels, a radical faction historians and ancient sources refer to as the Sicarii, known for their fierce opposition to both Roman rule and Jewish leaders they considered too accommodating toward Rome, seized control of Masada from its Roman garrison, taking possession of Herod's fortress and its substantial stored supplies for their own use. For several years, Masada remained in rebel hands while the broader war played out across the region. The pivotal turning point came in 70 AD, when Roman forces under the future Emperor Titus captured and destroyed Jerusalem, effectively crushing the main body of the Jewish revolt. In the aftermath, Roman forces methodically moved to eliminate the last remaining pockets of rebel resistance still holding out across Judea. 3 fortified sites in particular: Herodium near Bethlehem, Machaerus east of the Dead Sea, and Masada itself. Herodium fell relatively quickly, and the defenders at Machaerus ultimately surrendered before the Romans launched a full assault. That left a single holdout: Masada, now the last fortified position anywhere in Judea still under rebel control, led by a commander named Eleazar ben Yair. What had begun as one king's private refuge from his own fears had become, without Herod ever intending it, the final physical stronghold of an entire nation's rebellion against Rome. Subduing Masada fell first to the Roman governor of Judea, Lucilius Bassus, and then, after his death, to his successor, Lucius Flavius Silva, who arrived at the base of Masada with the Roman 10th Legion known as Legio Ex Fretensis sometime around 72 or 73 AD. The scale of the Roman response was genuinely enormous relative to the target. Ancient and modern estimates place the total Roman force, including legionaries, auxiliary troops, and enslaved laborers, somewhere between roughly 5,000 and 10,000 people. Arrayed against a rebel population inside the fortress numbering under 1,000, including non-combatants. Roman forces constructed a full circumvallation wall and a series of siege camps completely encircling the base of the plateau, physical remains that still survive today, and which UNESCO recognizes as the most complete set of Roman siege works preserved anywhere in the world. Since Masada's cliffs made a direct assault essentially impossible, Silva's engineers instead undertook a massive construction project of their own. A solid earthen and timber assault ramp built up the western slope of the plateau at its most vulnerable approach, using forced labor. Modern measurements place the completed ramp at roughly 600 meters long, rising some 61 meters up to the fortress walls. An engineering undertaking nearly as remarkable, in its own way, as anything Herod's builders had accomplished a century earlier, though built for the opposite purpose. Once the ramp neared completion in the spring of 73 AD, Roman forces moved a heavy siege tower up its length, equipped with a battering ram and stone-throwing artillery, preparing for the final assault against a fortress that until this moment had genuinely appeared unconquerable. The Roman siege tower reached Masada's outer wall in the spring of 73 AD, and the final assault began. According to Josephus, the Jewish historian, whose account remains our primary written source for these events, the defenders had reinforced their fortification with an inner wall built partly from timber, designed to absorb and cushion the impact of Roman battering rams more effectively than stone alone. It was an effective countermeasure against blunt force, but it created an unexpected vulnerability. Roman soldiers, according to Josephus, discharged a volley of flaming torches directly into this wooden reinforcement, setting it ablaze. For a brief period, shifting desert winds reportedly threatened to blow the flames back toward the Roman siege tower itself, before the wind changed direction and the fire instead tore through the timber-reinforced wall, opening a breach into the fortress. One detailed modern reconstruction of the timeline places this final breach on April 16, 73 AD, though the precise date rests on interpretation of Josephus's account rather than an independently dated inscription or record. With the wall breached and darkness falling, the Roman commanders reportedly made the decision to wait until morning to launch their final assault into the fortress, rather than risk a night battle in unfamiliar terrain against an enemy with nothing left to lose. That decision, whether made out of caution or simple military routine, would leave the defenders of Masada with one final night behind their broken wall, the night that would come to define how this entire story has been remembered for the next 2,000 years. What happened inside Masada that final night comes to us from a single source: Josephus, writing his account of the Jewish war roughly 2 decades after the events he describes. According to Josephus, the rebel commander Eleazar ben Yair, recognizing that the breach meant the fortress could not be held once morning came, gathered the defenders and delivered a speech arguing that death by their own hands was preferable to capture, enslavement, or execution at Roman hands. Josephus records that the roughly 960 men, women, and children inside chose to follow this course of action together. The account describes a specific, deliberate process shaped by Jewish religious prohibitions against suicide. Rather than each individual taking their own life directly, Josephus states that men first killed their own wives and children, then drew lots among themselves, with each selected man killing another, continuing in sequence until only a single man remained, who set fire to the remaining storerooms and finally took his own life, ensuring no one died fully by their own hand, except this last individual. When Roman soldiers entered the fortress the following morning expecting fierce final resistance, Josephus describes them instead finding only silence, smoke, and the dead. According to his account, only 7 people survived to tell the story: 2 women and 5 children who had hidden themselves inside one of the fortress's water cisterns during the night, and emerged afterward to relay what had happened to the arriving Roman forces, and eventually, it's presumed, to Josephus himself. Here's the detail that deserves far more attention than it usually receives. Josephus is our only ancient source for the mass suicide at Masada. No independent Roman account, no other contemporary Jewish source corroborates the specific details of that final night. And Josephus himself wasn't present. He was writing based on second-hand information, reportedly relayed through the small number of survivors, compiled roughly 2 decades after the events themselves. This matters because many historians studying the period have raised genuine, serious questions about how literally Josephus's dramatic account should be taken. Some scholars have gone so far as to question whether the mass suicide, as specifically described, happened at all, versus a different, less dramatically tidy end to the siege. Josephus, it's worth remembering, was writing partly for a Roman audience and had his own complicated relationship with both Jewish and Roman authority, having surrendered to Roman forces himself earlier in the war, a background that reasonably invites scrutiny of how he chose to frame this particular episode. What archaeological evidence can confirm is more limited, but genuinely meaningful. Yadin's 1960s excavations recovered clear evidence that a real battle took place at Masada around this time. Burned structures consistent with the fire Josephus describes, a substantial cache of weapons and arrowheads, and the Roman siege ramp and camps themselves, still physically present at the site today. Some skeletal remains have also been recovered from the site, though their precise connection to the specific events of 73 AD versus other periods of the site's occupation remains a matter of ongoing archaeological interpretation rather than absolute certainty. There's one more genuinely interesting wrinkle worth including here. A 2025 archaeological reanalysis has challenged the long-standing popular belief that the Roman siege of Masada lasted up to 3 years. This newer research instead suggests the actual military campaign, from the Romans' arrival to the final breach, likely lasted only a few months, a meaningful revision to a detail widely repeated in documentaries and popular retellings for decades, and a useful reminder that even well-known ancient history continues to be actively re-examined as new evidence and methods emerge. The honest conclusion is this. A real siege happened at Masada in 73 AD, and the physical evidence supports that a real battle and a real ending took place there. The precise details of that final night, the speech, the drawn lots, the exact sequence of deaths, rest almost entirely on one writer's account, composed after the fact, and deserve to be understood as history filtered through a single, imperfect narrator, rather than an unquestionable transcript of exactly what occurred. We can't know with certainty everything that happened during that last night behind the broken wall, but we know the ramp is real. We know the fire was real. And for 2,000 years, this isolated desert cliff has stood as one of history's most powerful symbols of resistance, whether every detail happened exactly as told or not. If you want to keep separating the evidence of the ancient world from the stories told about it, subscribe, because we're just getting started rebuilding history, one fortress at a time.